The blood-soaked wedding dress clung to Rose Kincaid's skin as she crawled through the underbrush, each movement sending fresh waves of pain through her battered body. Her husband of just 12 hours had revealed his true nature once the bedroom door closed. And now, in the middle of nowhere outside Colfax, California, she prayed for salvation or death, whichever might find her first. Rose had arrived in Colfax just 3 months prior, in the spring of 1875. The small mining town, nestled in the Sierra Nevada foothills, promised new beginnings after her father's death left her destitute in San Francisco. Her cousin Martha had written of a teaching position available at the newly established schoolhouse, and Rose, with her proper Boston education, seemed the perfect candidate. Colfax had welcomed her with suspicious eyes at first, another city woman come to bring civilization to their rough-hewn town. But Rose's genuine love for teaching and her kind demeanor slowly won over the residents. All except Vernon Keegan, the town's most eligible bachelor and owner of Colfax's largest saloon. Vernon had set his sights on the beautiful newcomer from the moment she stepped off the stagecoach. He was handsome, she couldn't deny that, tall with dark hair and a meticulously groomed mustache. His clothes were always impeccable, a sign of his wealth in a town where most men wore the same faded shirts until they fell apart. He courted her properly, bringing flowers to the small room she rented above the general store, escorting her to church on Sundays, and even donating handsomely to the school fund. Martha had been thrilled when Vernon proposed after just 2 months. "You won't find a better match in all of California," she'd insisted, helping Rose prepare for the modest ceremony. What neither woman knew was that Vernon's charming facade masked a violent temper fueled by whiskey and insecurity. Now, as the first pink streaks of dawn appeared on the horizon, Rose's torn fingernails dug into the earth, pulling her broken body forward inch by excruciating inch. She'd managed to flee while Vernon lay passed out, but she knew he would awaken soon, discover her absence, and hunt her down. The blood from the gash on her forehead mixed with her tears, blurring her vision as consciousness threatened to leave her. "Just a little further," she whispered to herself, though she had no destination in mind, just away from the monster she'd married. Away from the hands that had nearly choked the life from her when she'd cried out in pain during what should have been their loving consummation. The sound of hoofbeats in the distance sent a fresh wave of terror through her. Had Vernon awakened already, found her trail? Rose tried to crawl faster, but her strength was fading. The hoofbeats grew louder and then stopped. She heard the soft thud of boots hitting the ground, and she curled into herself, waiting for Vernon's rage to descend upon her once more. "Good Lord in heaven," a deep voice that was definitely not Vernon's said. Madam, can you hear me?" Rose whimpered, unable to form words as gentle hands turned her over. Through the blood and tears, she made out the silhouette of a man against the brightening sky, not Vernon, a stranger. "I'm not going to hurt you," the man said, his voice soft but urgent. "But you need help, and quick." The last thing Rose remembered before darkness claimed her was being lifted in strong arms that smelled of leather, pine, and honesty. Tucker Blackburn had been tracking a mountain lion for 3 days when he stumbled upon the bloody trail in the underbrush. The predator had been picking off calves from his small herd, and Tucker couldn't afford the losses. But all thoughts of the mountain lion vanished when he found the woman. She was barely conscious, her white dress a wedding dress, he realized, with shock, torn and soaked with blood. Her face was so badly bruised that he could barely make out her features, but he could tell she was young, probably in her early 20s. What disturbed him most was the distinct pattern of fingerprints around her throat. Tucker had seen violence in his 30 years. He'd fought in the latter years of the Civil War, had broken up his fair share of saloon fights, and had even been deputized once to help bring in a murderer. But the deliberate cruelty visited upon this woman made his blood run cold. He gently wrapped her in his bedroll and carefully placed her on his horse. His cabin was closer than town, and from the look of her injuries, she needed immediate attention. Besides, whoever had done this to her might be looking for her in Colfax. Tucker's cabin was modest but well built, constructed with his own hands after he'd claimed the land 5 years earlier. His nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, providing the solitude he'd sought after the war. Sometimes the isolation weighed on him, but today he was grateful for it. He laid the woman on his bed and set about tending her wounds with the same gentle efficiency he used with injured animals. The gash on her forehead needed stitches, but her other injuries, while painful, didn't appear life-threatening. The bruising told a story of brutal, sustained violence. As he worked, the woman drifted in and out of consciousness. Once her eyes flew open, beautiful green eyes, he noted, and she tried to scramble away from him in terror. "It's all right," Tucker said, keeping his distance and showing his empty hands. "You're safe here. I found you in the woods. I'm just trying to help." She stared at him, wild-eyed, before exhaustion claimed her again. By midday, Tucker had done all he could for her injuries. He sat in the chair beside the bed, watching her breathe, wondering what devil had done this to her and what he should do next. Taking her to town seemed the logical choice, but the wedding dress gave him pause. Was her husband looking for her? Was he the one who had hurt her? The thought made Tucker's jaw clench. He decided to wait until she could tell him what happened before making any decisions. In the meantime, he moved to the porch to give her privacy, keeping his rifle across his lap. Someone had tried to kill this woman, and Tucker wasn't taking any chances that they might come looking to finish the job. It was nearly dusk when he heard movement inside the cabin. He entered to find the woman attempting to sit up, panic evident on her battered face. "Please," she whispered, her voice raspy, "don't take me back to town." Tucker approached slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. "I won't do anything you don't want. You're safe here." "He'll kill me," she said, a tear slipping down her cheek. "My husband will kill me if he finds me." Tucker felt a cold fury building inside him, but he kept his voice calm. "Your husband did this to you," she nodded, wincing at the movement. "We were married yesterday, Vernon." "He changed once we were alone." "Vernon," Tucker repeated, committing the name to memory. "Vernon what?" "Keegan," she said. "Vernon Keegan. He owns the Golden Nugget Saloon in Colfax." Tucker knew of Keegan by reputation, a wealthy man with political connections, known to be generous with his money but quick to anger. People respected him publicly, but there were whispers about his temper. "I'm Tucker Blackburn," he said, offering her a cup of water. "My friends call me Tuck." "This is my land you're on. What's your name?" "Rose," she said after taking a small sip. "Rose Kincaid. I mean Keegan now, I suppose." Her face crumpled at the realization. "Rose," Tucker said gently, "you need to rest. We can figure everything out tomorrow." "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need to." Gratitude shone through the fear in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Blackburn." "Tuck," he corrected with a small smile. "Try to sleep. I'll be right outside if you need anything." As Rose drifted off to sleep, Tucker sat on his porch, loading and unloading his revolver methodically. The law in these parts was often as fair as the men enforcing it, and Vernon Keegan had influence. But one thing was certain: Tucker Blackburn would not be returning Rose to a man who had beaten her within an inch of her life on their wedding night. Rose slept fitfully, plagued by nightmares of Vernon's hands around her throat. Each time she woke gasping, she found Tucker tucked nearby, his steady presence somehow comforting despite being a stranger. By morning, her body ached in ways she hadn't known possible, but the fog of terror had lifted slightly, allowing her to think more clearly. Tuck brought her a simple breakfast of cornbread and coffee. As she ate, she studied him openly for the first time. He was older than she by perhaps 8 or 10 years, with weathered skin that spoke of a life outdoors. His hair was the color of wheat, and his eyes were a startling blue beneath sun-bleached brows. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, so unlike Vernon's showy swagger. "I need to know what happened," Tuck said as he sat in the chair beside the bed. "If I'm to help you, I need to understand what we're facing." Rose set down her coffee cup, her hands trembling slightly. "I came to Colfax to teach at the new school. Vernon courted me, seemed so kind and respectable. After we married, he brought me to his house outside of town. Once we were alone, he started drinking. When it came time to consummate the marriage." She faltered, shame coloring her cheeks. Tuck's expression remained neutral, though she saw a muscle in his jaw tighten. "He hurt me," she continued, forcing the words out. "When I cried, he became enraged, said I was insulting his manhood. He hit me again and again, said he'd teach me to be a proper wife." She touched the stitches on her forehead. "He smashed my head against the bedpost. I thought he would kill me, but he passed out from the whiskey. I waited until his breathing was deep, then ran. I don't know how far I got before you found me." Tuck's hands had curled into fists during her story, but his voice remained steady. "Keegan has friends in town, including Sheriff Doyle. Going to the law might not help your situation." "What can I do?" Rose asked, desperation edging into her voice. "He'll never let me go. He'll say I'm his wife, and the law will agree." "For now, you need to heal," Tuck said. "No one knows you're here. We have time to figure out a plan." "I can't impose on you like this," Rose protested weakly. Tuck smiled for the first time, transforming his serious face. "Madam, I fought in the war, built this cabin with my own 2 hands, and survived winters that would make most men weep. I think I can handle having a house guest." His easy humor surprised a small laugh from her, though it quickly turned to a wince as her bruised ribs protested. "Rest," Tuck said, standing. "I need to check my cattle, but I won't go far. There's a loaded shotgun under the bed if you need it, though I doubt anyone will come this way." The mention of the shotgun reminded Rose of the danger they both faced. "If Vernon discovers you helped me, he'll come after you too." Tuck paused at the door, his expression hardening. "Let him try." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Tuck would tend to his small ranch in the mornings, returning to the cabin at midday to check on Rose. In the afternoons, he sat on the porch, whittling or mending tack, always within earshot if she called. He slept on a bedroll by the fireplace, giving Rose the only bed. As her strength returned, Rose began to help around the cabin, despite Tuck's protests. She found comfort in the simple tasks, making biscuits, sweeping the rough-hewn floor, even attempting to mend one of Tuck's shirts. The normalcy helped keep the panic at bay, though she jumped at every unexpected sound. One afternoon, about a week after Tuck had found her, Rose was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She froze, heart hammering in her chest, until she recognized Tuck's chestnut gelding. But something was wrong. Tuck was riding fast, his usual unhurried pace abandoned. He dismounted before the horse had fully stopped. "Get inside," he ordered, his voice tense. "Keegan's got a search party combing these hills." Rose hurried into the cabin, Tuck close behind her. "How do you know?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ran into Bill Harper checking his traps. He said Keegan's telling everyone his new bride wandered off, probably confused from a fall. Says she hit her head on a bedpost during the night and was gone when he woke up." Tuck's expression was thunderous. He's playing the worried husband, offering a reward for information. Rose sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "They'll believe him. Everyone in town thinks he's so respectable. Bill said they're searching to the east today, but they'll be heading this way tomorrow or the next day." Tuck ran a hand through his hair, thinking. "We need to move you someplace safer." "Where could I possibly go?" Rose asked, despair washing over her. "I have no family except my cousin Martha, and she'd take me straight back to Vernon. I have no money, no friends outside of Colfax." Tuck knelt before her, taking her hands in his. His calloused fingers were warm and steady against her trembling ones. "I have a friend, Jeremiah, who runs a way station on the road to Sacramento. He could get you on a stage heading west. From there, you could go anywhere San Francisco, maybe even back east." Rose shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "And then what? I'd have nothing, be nothing, a woman alone with no references, no means of support." She met his gaze directly. "And Vernon would still be my husband under the law. He could find me, claim me, and no one would stop him." Tuck was silent for a long moment, his blue eyes troubled. "There's another option," he said finally, "but you won't like it." "Tell me," Rose urged. "I could confront Keegan, challenge him." Rose's eyes widened in horror. "You mean kill him?" "No. I won't have your blood on my hands or his on yours. Not kill him necessarily, but make it clear that you're under my protection." Tuck's voice hardened. "Men like Keegan, they're bullies. They back down when truly challenged. You don't know Vernon, Rose said, her voice shaking. His pride would never allow it. He'd rather see me dead than let another man steal me. Tuck stood, pacing the small confines of the cabin. Then we need to find a way to end your marriage that even the law would recognize. Rose gave a bitter laugh. Short of Vernon's death or proof of adultery, there's no way out of a marriage, and I've been his wife for barely a week. Tuck stopped pacing, a sudden intensity in his expression. There might be a way. If we can prove he tried to kill you, that he's a danger to your life, a judge might grant an annulment. How could we possibly prove that? It's his word against mine, and he's a respected businessman. Your injuries, Tuck said. Doc Wilson in Colfax is a good man, fair-minded. If he examined you, documented your injuries, he'd still need to testify against one of the most powerful men in town, Rose pointed out. Maybe, Tuck conceded, but there might be others who have seen Keegan's true nature, bar fights he's been in, women he's mistreated. Rose considered this. It was a fragile plan, built on too many uncertainties, but it offered a glimmer of hope. Even if we found witnesses, we'd need a judge to hear the case. Circuit judge comes through Auburn every month. It's not far. Tuck sat beside her, his expression softening. It won't be easy, Rose. But I won't let him hurt you again. The conviction in his voice made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. In the short time she'd known him, Tucker Blackburn had shown her more kindness than she'd experienced in years. She found herself studying the lines of his face, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. "You don't know me. I've brought nothing but danger to your door." Tuck looked surprised by the question. "Because it's right," he said simply, "and because no one helped my sister when she needed it." It was the first time he'd mentioned family, and Rose remained silent, sensing there was more to the story. "Sarah married young to a man much like your Vernon," Tuck continued, his voice low. "I was away fighting. By the time I came home, she was gone, died from a fall down the stairs, they said. Her husband remarried within the month." "I'm so sorry," Rose whispered. "I didn't see the signs before it was too late," Tuck said, his eyes distant with memory. "I won't make that mistake again." The vulnerability in his admission touched Rose deeply. This strong, capable man carried his own wounds, his own regrets. In that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. "We should leave at first light," Tuck said, breaking the moment. "Pack only what you need. We'll head for Jeremiah's station first. It's safer than town, and he might have news about Keegan's search." That night, Rose lay awake long after Tuck had settled into his bedroll by the fire. Tomorrow they would leave the sanctuary of the cabin, venturing closer to Vernon and the danger he represented. Fear coiled in her stomach, but alongside it was something new: determination. With Tuck beside her, she would fight for her freedom, for a future of her own choosing. In the dim light, she studied Tuck's profile as he slept. His face was relaxed in slumber, making him look younger. She wondered what he had been like before the war, before his sister's death had etched those lines of sorrow around his eyes. For the first time since fleeing Vernon's house, Rose allowed herself to think beyond mere survival. If she could escape this marriage, what would she want? To teach again, certainly. To build a life where she answered to no one but herself. And perhaps, someday, to find a love that didn't seek to possess or control, but to cherish. As sleep finally claimed her, Rose's last conscious thought was that Tucker Blackburn's hands, unlike Vernon's, had brought only healing. They set out before dawn, Tuck leading the way on his gelding while Rose rode the placid mare he kept for packing supplies. She wore a pair of Tuck's trousers and one of his shirts, both comically large on her frame but more practical than her torn wedding dress, which they'd burned the night before. With her hair tucked under a hat and the bruises on her face fading to yellow, she might pass for a young man at a distance, another precaution against being recognized. The way station run by Tuck's friend Jeremiah sat at a crossroads about 15 miles from Colfax, serving as a rest stop for stage coaches and travelers. It was a modest establishment, a 2-story building housing a small tavern, a few rooms for rent, and stables, but it offered a critical advantage. Jeremiah Collins answered to no one, least of all the influential men of Colfax. They arrived as the midday stage was departing, dust still hanging in the air from its passage. A wiry man with a shock of white hair emerged from the stable, grinning broadly at the sight of Tuck. Blackburn, twice in 1 month. "The world must be ending," he called, approaching with a hand extended. Tuck dismounted and clasped the offered hand. "Need your help, Jer," he said without preamble, nodding toward Rose. "This is Rose. She's in trouble." Jeremiah's keen eyes took in Rose's bruised face and ill-fitting clothes. Understanding dawned in his expression. "Inside," he said simply, leading them toward the back entrance of the building. In the private quarters behind the tavern, Rose sat at Jeremiah's kitchen table while Tuck explained the situation. The older man listened without interruption, his weathered face growing increasingly grim. "Keegan," he spat when Tuck finished. "Should have known. Man's had a reputation since he arrived in these parts 5 years ago. Sweet as honey in public, especially to those who can help him, but there've been whispers." "What kind of whispers?" Tuck asked. Jeremiah poured coffee for all of them before answering. "Girl who worked for him at the saloon last year, Sadie, I think her name, was left town suddenly. Rumor was she had bruises she couldn't explain, and there was a Mexican fella who called Keegan out for cheating at cards. Found him beaten half to death behind the saloon the next morning." "Would anyone be willing to testify to this?" Rose asked, hope flaring. Jeremiah shrugged. "Folks are scared of him, and not just because of his fists. He's got money, connections all the way to Sacramento, makes himself useful to the right people." "What about Doc Wilson?" Tuck asked. "Is he still his own man, or has Keegan bought him too?" "Doc's straight as they come," Jeremiah said. "But getting to him won't be easy. Keegan's got men watching the roads into town, and he's been at the doctor's office himself, spinning some tale about his poor addled wife." Rose's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "He's making me sound crazy." "Classic move for men like him," Jeremiah agreed. "If you show up with your story, he'll say you're confused, hysterical, maybe even dangerous to yourself." Tuck stood, restless energy evident in every line of his body. "We need to get word to Doc Wilson privately, have him meet us somewhere outside of town." "I might be able to help with that," Jeremiah said. "Doc's boy Jimmy works for me sometimes, exercising the horses. He's due tomorrow morning." "Can he be trusted?" Rose asked. Jeremiah nodded. "Jimmy's a good kid, and he's no fan of Keegan. Caught the sharp end of his temper once when he accidentally spilled a drink on Keegan's fancy boots." "Then we wait," Tuck said, though it was clear patience didn't come easily to him. "Rose needs rest anyway." Jeremiah showed them to a small room at the back of the building, away from the tavern and the curious eyes of travelers. "Not much, but it's clean," he said apologetically. "It's perfect," Rose assured him. "I can't thank you enough." Once they were alone, the awkwardness of sharing the small space became apparent. There was only one bed, narrow but serviceable. "I'll sleep on the floor," Tuck said immediately, noting Rose's discomfort. "You've already spent a week sleeping on your cabin floor because of me," Rose protested. "I can't ask that of you again. You're not asking, I'm offering." Tuck's tone brooked no argument. "Besides, I've slept on worse." Rose wanted to object further, but exhaustion was overtaking her. The ride had taxed her still-healing body, and the constant vigilance had drained her mental resources. "Wake me if there's any news," she asked instead, settling onto the bed. "I promise," Tuck said, his voice softening as he noticed her fatigue. "Rest now, you're safe here." As Rose drifted toward sleep, she found herself watching Tuck through half-closed eyes as he cleaned his revolver, his movements precise and familiar. There was something profoundly comforting about his presence, not just the physical protection he offered, but the steadiness of his character. In a world that had proven wildly unpredictable, Tucker Blackburn was a fixed point, solid as the earth itself. She was nearly asleep when she heard him speak, so quietly she almost missed it. "I'll keep you safe, Rose, whatever it takes." The simple vow followed her into dreams that, for once, were not haunted by Vernon's rage. Morning brought Jimmy Wilson, Doc's 16-year-old son, eager to help after hearing a carefully edited version of the situation from Jeremiah. The boy agreed to carry a message to his father, asking him to come to the way station under the pretense of treating a traveler too ill to be moved. Pa won't like the deception, Jimmy said, but he likes Keegan even less. Heard him muttering about the man plenty of times. By mid-afternoon, a familiar buggy appeared on the road from Colfax. Doc Wilson, a portly man with spectacles and a perpetually worried expression, followed Jeremiah to the private room where Tuck and Rose waited. The doctor stopped short when he saw Rose, recognition and shock passing over his features. "Mrs. Keegan," he said, "your husband has the whole town searching for you." "I'm sure he does," Rose replied, steeling herself, "but not out of concern, I assure you." Wilson's eyes narrowed as he took in her fading bruises. "I think you'd better tell me what's going on." For the third time, Rose recounted the events of her wedding night, forcing herself to include details she would rather have forgotten. When she finished, the room was silent except for the ticking of a clock on the mantel. "I need to examine you," Doc Wilson said finally. "Document your injuries." Tuck and Jeremiah stepped outside while the doctor conducted his examination. When he emerged 30 minutes later, his face was grim. "The pattern of bruising is consistent with her account," he told Tuck. "Defensive wounds on the arms, bruising around the throat from strangulation, evidence of forceful relations." He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I've seen similar injuries before, though most women don't seek treatment." "Or escape. Will you testify to this?" Tuck asked. Before a judge, Wilson hesitated. "Keegan won't take it lightly. Your practice is built on treating minors and their families," Jeremiah interrupted. "Not on Keegan's patronage. And what of Mrs. Keegan's safety in the meantime?" the doctor asked. "If her husband discovers she's alive and seeking an annulment, he'll be desperate to silence her." "That's why we need to move quickly," Tuck said. "The circuit judge is due in Auburn next week. If we can get Rose there, present your testimony along with any other witnesses we can find." "I'll write out my findings," Wilson decided, "but getting an annulment won't be easy even with evidence. Marriage is sacred in the eyes of the law." "So is a woman's life," Rose said quietly. Wilson's expression softened. "Indeed it is, Mrs. Keegan. I'll do what I can to help you." After the doctor left, with promises to send word through Jimmy about other potential witnesses, Rose felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Someone believed her. Someone with standing in the community was willing to support her account. Tuck seemed to sense her relief. "It's a start," he said, sitting beside her at Jeremiah's table. "Now we need to build a stronger case, find others who have seen Keegan's violent side." "And keep Rose hidden until the hearing," Jeremiah added. "Keegan came through here yesterday with 2 of his men asking questions. I played dumb, but he's determined." "We should move on," Tuck decided. "It's too risky staying in one place." "Where would we go?" Rose asked. "Auburn? Not yet. Too obvious if Keegan gets wind of our plan." Tuck thought for a moment. "I have another place, a line shack up in the high country where I keep cattle in summer. It's remote, hard to find unless you know where to look." "I'm not sure Rose is strong enough for that journey," Jeremiah cautioned, eyeing her with concern. "I'm stronger than I look," Rose said, straightening her shoulders despite the ache that still lingered in her ribs. "And I'd rather face a difficult journey than Vernon." Tuck studied her face, and whatever he saw there must have convinced him. "We'll leave at first light. Jur, can you get word to Doc Wilson about where to send any information he gathers?" As the men discussed logistics, Rose found herself thinking about the days ahead. She would be alone with Tuck in an even more isolated location than his cabin. The propriety she'd been raised to value balked at the arrangement, but such concerns seemed trivial compared to the very real threat Vernon posed. Besides, in the week she'd spent in Tuck's care, he had never once made her uncomfortable or given her reason to doubt his honor. That night, as she prepared for bed in the small room they shared, Rose broke the comfortable silence between them. "Tuck, if this doesn't work, if the judge refuses to grant an annulment, what will I do?" Tuck paused in the act of spreading his bedroll on the floor. "We'll face that if it happens," he said, "but you won't face it alone." "You've already done so much," Rose said. "I can't ask you to append your life indefinitely for me." Tuck sat on the edge of the bed, careful to maintain a respectful distance between them. Rose, when I found you in those woods, you were barely alive. I made a choice then to help you, and I haven't regretted it for a moment. He hesitated, then continued more softly. Maybe I needed to find you as much as you needed to be found. The vulnerability in his admission touched something deep inside her. What do you mean? Tuck looked away, focusing on some point beyond the room's small window. After Sarah died, I was lost, angry at the world, at myself for not being there when she needed me. I came out here to get away from people, from memories, built my place, worked the land, existed more than lived. He met her eyes again. Helping you has given me purpose again, so don't thank me. If anything, I should thank you. Rose felt tears well up, unexpected and unwelcome. No one had ever spoken to her with such honesty, such genuine emotion. Vernon's courtship had been all flowery words and grand gestures, designed to impress rather than connect. This simple conversation with Tuck felt more intimate than any moment she'd shared with the man she'd married. I don't know what to say, she admitted. You don't have to say anything, Tuck assured her. Just know that whatever happens, you have choices, I'll make sure of it. In that moment, something shifted between them, a deepening of trust, perhaps, or the first stirrings of feelings neither was ready to acknowledge. Rose felt it like a physical thing, this connection to a man she'd known for such a short time yet trusted with her life. We should get some sleep, Tuck said after a moment, breaking the tension. Long ride tomorrow. As Rose settled under the blankets, she found herself thinking not of the dangers ahead but of Tuck's words, you have choices. After a lifetime of having her path dictated by others, her father, her circumstances, and briefly, terribly, Vernon, the simple assertion felt revolutionary. She fell asleep wondering what choices she might make if she were truly free to decide her own fate. The lined shack was even more primitive than Tuck had described, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, and a roof that looked like it might surrender to a strong wind. But it was clean, stocked with basic provisions, and most importantly, nearly impossible to find unless you knew exactly where to look. They'd ridden for 2 days to reach it, taking a circuitous route through dense forests and steep terrain. Rose's body protested every jolt of the journey, but she refused to complain. The wilderness, for all its hardships, represented safety from Vernon, and she drank in the beauty of the towering pines and distant mountains with the thirst of one who had feared she might never see such freedom again. Tuck moved around the shack with practiced efficiency, starting a fire, checking the supplies, and preparing a simple meal of beans and jerky. Rose watched him, noting how different he seemed here in the mountains, more relaxed, more at home than he'd been even at his own cabin. You love it up here, she observed as they ate by firelight. Tuck nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. There's a peace to it, no expectations, no judgments, just you and the land, honest in its demands. Is that why you live alone, for the peace? The question had escaped before Rose could consider its propriety, but Tuck didn't seem offended. Partly, he admitted. After the war, crowds made me jumpy. Too many sounds, too many possibilities for danger. Out here, I can see trouble coming. He paused, stirring the beans thoughtfully. And I suppose I got used to my own company. Don't you get lonely? Something flickered across Tuck's face, a brief acknowledgement of a truth he rarely voiced. Sometimes, he said, but better lonely than tied to someone out of desperation or convenience. He looked at her directly. Is that why you married Keegan? Convenience? The question stung, but Rose recognized its fairness. Not exactly. I thought I could learn to love him in time. He seemed so. Solid, dependable. She laughed bitterly. How wrong I was. People show you what they want you to see, Tuck said. Especially when they're courting. Is that what you did when you were courting? Rose asked, curious about this man who had become her protector. Tuck's smile turned wry. Never got that far, came close once before the war. Anna Sinclair, the banker's daughter back home in Missouri. Pretty kind. We were talking about a future when Lincoln called for volunteers. His expression darkened. I came back different. She'd moved on. The simple story held volumes of unspoken pain. Rose wondered what Tuck had been like before the war reshaped him, before loss and solitude became his companions. I think I like the man you are now, she said softly. The one who stops to help strangers bleeding in the woods. Tuck looked up, surprise evident in his blue eyes. For a moment, something passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of the peculiar intimacy that had developed in their short acquaintance. Then he cleared his throat and stood to bank the fire. "We should rest," he said. "I'll take the floor again." Rose wanted to protest, to insist he take the narrow cot while she slept by the fire, but she recognized the futility. Tuck had made up his mind to be her protector in all ways, including sacrificing his own comfort. "Good night, Tuck," she said instead, "and thank you for everything." His silhouette against the dying fire was the last thing she saw before closing her eyes, and she found herself hoping it wouldn't be the last night she spent in his company. The days at the line shack fell into a routine. Tuck would hunt or fish in the mornings, bringing back fresh meat to supplement their provisions. Rose kept the shack tidy and even managed to create more palatable meals from their limited supplies. In the afternoons, they would sit outside, Rose mending Tuck's shirts or reading from the dog-eared copy of Emerson's essays he'd brought along, Tuck whittling or cleaning his guns. They talked more than Rose suspected Tuck had talked to anyone in years. She learned about his childhood in Missouri, his parents long deceased, the war that had both hardened and haunted him. In turn, she told him of her own upbringing in Boston, her father's business failures that had prompted their move to San Francisco, her dreams of establishing a proper school in Colfax. They avoided discussing Vernon or the upcoming hearing, as if by mutual agreement. Those conversations belonged to a harsher reality, one that couldn't touch them in the peaceful isolation of the mountains. On their 5th day at the shack, Tuck returned from hunting earlier than usual, his expression troubled. "Saw smoke to the east," he said without preamble. Could be a campfire, could be nothing. Rose felt the familiar clutch of fear in her stomach, or it could be Vernon. "We're a good 20 miles from Colfax, through terrain few would attempt without good reason," Tuck reassured her, "but we should be cautious." No fires during the day, limited movement outside. The carefree atmosphere of their mountain refuge evaporated, replaced by the vigilance they'd temporarily set aside. Tuck took to scouting the surrounding area each morning, returning with reports of no disturbances, but the tension remained. On the 7th day, they received their first visitor, Jimmy Wilson, Doc's son, who had tracked them based on Jeremiah's vague directions. The boy was exhausted but triumphant, bearing a sealed letter from his father. "Pa said to tell you that 3 women have come forward," Jimmy reported as he devoured the stew Rose quickly prepared. "Former workers at Keegan's saloon, and a man named Miguel Sanchez, the one Mr. Keegan beat over the card game." Tuck read the doctor's letter with growing satisfaction. "Wilson's documented their statements, says the judge has agreed to hear Rose's petition for annulment in 3 days' time." Hope surged through Rose, dizzying in its intensity. 3 days, she repeated. "So soon." "Not a moment too soon," Jimmy said around a mouthful of stew. "Keegan's gone crazy looking for you, Mrs. Keegan, offering $50 to anyone with information. Started accusing folks of hiding you, even had Sheriff Doyle search the schoolhouse and your cousin's place." "Has he come to your father's again?" Rose asked, worried for the doctor who had risked so much to help her. Jimmy nodded. "Twice. Pa told him he'd taken an oath to help the sick and injured, not to hunt down grown women who had every right to go where they pleased. Keegan didn't like that one bit." "Your pa's a brave man," Tuck said, respect evident in his voice. "He says he's just doing what's right," Jimmy replied with obvious pride. "Says more folks should try it sometime." After finishing his meal and resting briefly, Jimmy departed with a message for Doc Wilson. They would meet him in Auburn the following evening at the hotel across from the courthouse. Once the boy was gone, Rose and Tuck began preparations for their own departure. The hearing was scheduled for the day after tomorrow, which meant leaving at first light to reach Auburn by nightfall. As Rose packed her few belongings, the men's clothes she'd been wearing, and a simple dress Jeremiah had procured for her to wear to court, she felt both anticipation and dread. If the judge ruled in her favor, she would be free of Vernon legally as well as physically, but if he didn't, Stop worrying, Tuck said, reading her expression with uncanny accuracy. Wilson's letter says we have a strong case. The judge is known to be fair-minded. Vernon will be there, Rose said quietly. I'll have to see him face him. Tuck moved to stand before her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Rose Kincaid. You survived that night. You crawled through those woods with injuries that would have stopped most people. You've never once given up. His blue eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. Don't start now. Rose felt something shift inside her at his words, his touch. Without thinking, she raised her hand to his cheek, feeling the scratch of his beard against her palm. I couldn't have done any of it without you. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of them, standing close in the dimly lit shack. Tuck's gaze dropped to her lips, and Rose felt herself sway slightly toward him, drawn by a force as natural as gravity. Then Tuck stepped back, clearing his throat. We should get some sleep, he said, his voice rougher than usual. Long ride tomorrow. The moment broken, Rose could only nod, confused by the sudden ache in her chest. Had she imagined the tension between them, misread his concern for something more personal? As she lay on the cot that night, listening to Tuck's steady breathing from his place by the fire, Rose acknowledged a truth she'd been avoiding. Somewhere along the way, between the bloody flight from Vernon's house and this quiet evening in the mountains, she had developed feelings for Tucker Blackburn. Feelings that went far beyond gratitude or friendship. The realization should have complicated matters, added another layer of uncertainty to her already precarious situation. Instead, it settled over her with the warmth of recognition, not a new discovery, but the acknowledgement of something that had been true for some time. Whether Tuck shared those feelings, whether anything could ever come of them, was a question for another day. For now, Rose allowed herself the simple comfort of knowing that her heart, so recently betrayed, had found the courage to trust again. Auburn was larger than Colfax, a proper town with brick buildings and gaslit streets. The courthouse dominated the main square, a stately structure that represented both hope and terror for Rose as their horses approached in the fading light. They found Doc Wilson waiting at the hotel as planned, along with a surprised Jeremiah Collins. Couldn't let you face this alone, the older man explained when Tuck expressed surprise at his presence. Besides, I've got a bit of testimony myself to offer. Overheard Keegan threatening a saloon girl last year when I was delivering supplies. Didn't think much of it at the time, more fool me. The unexpected support brought tears to Rose's eyes. Thank you, she managed, overcome by the realization that she was no longer alone in her fight. Wilson outlined the plan for the hearing, scheduled for 10 o'clock the following morning. Judge Parker is fair but strict about protocol. Rose will present her petition, I'll offer medical testimony, then the other witnesses will corroborate the pattern of behavior. He hesitated. Keegan will have the opportunity to respond, of course, his word against yours. Except it's not just her word anymore, Tuck pointed out. It's yours, Jeremiah's, and these other witnesses. Still, he's influential, Wilson cautioned, and annulments are rare even in cases of cruelty. Rose squared her shoulders. I have to try, the alternative is unthinkable. They retired early, Rose to a private room Wilson had secured for her, the men sharing another down the hall. Sleep proved elusive as Rose rehearsed what she would say to the judge, how she would respond if Vernon spoke to her directly. The dress Jeremiah had brought felt strange after days in trousers, a reminder of the societal constraints she was both fighting against and working within. Morning came too quickly. Rose dressed with trembling fingers, pinning her hair into a modest style befitting a respectable woman seeking the court's protection. When she emerged from her room, she found Tuck waiting in the hallway, clean-shaven and wearing a suit she'd never seen before. Borrowed from Jeremiah, he explained, looking uncomfortable in the formal attire. Thought it best to look presentable. The transformation was striking. Without his usual trail, dust, and stubble, Tuck looked younger, his strong features more defined. But it was the same steady blue gaze that met hers, the same quiet strength that had become her anchor. Ready? He asked softly. Rose took a deep breath. As I'll ever be, the courthouse was already crowded when they arrived, word of the unusual case having spread through town. Rose kept her eyes forward, aware of the whispers that followed their small procession to the front benches. Doc Wilson and Jeremiah flanked her, with Tuck positioned protectively at her side. At precisely 10 o'clock, the bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Parker entered, a tall man with silver hair and a stern countenance. As he settled behind the bench, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Vernon Keegan strode in, accompanied by Sheriff Doyle and a sharp-faced man Rose recognized as a lawyer from Sacramento. Vernon's eyes found her immediately, and the naked hatred in his gaze made her blood run cold. Then his expression smoothed into one of concern, the transformation so complete that Rose almost doubted what she'd seen. "Mrs. Rose Keegan seeks an annulment on grounds of extreme cruelty," Judge Parker announced, consulting the papers before him. "This is a serious matter. I expect all parties to comport themselves with dignity." He peered over his spectacles at Rose. "Mrs. Keegan, please approach." Standing before the judge, Rose felt every eye in the courtroom on her. Her voice shook initially as she began her account, but strengthened as she spoke. She described the courtship, the wedding, and then, in careful detail, the brutality of her wedding night. Several women in the gallery gasped at the more graphic elements, but Rose continued, determined that the full truth be heard. When she finished, the courtroom was silent except for the ticking of the large clock on the wall. Judge Parker's expression gave nothing away as he made notes. Doc Wilson testified next, describing Rose's injuries in clinical terms while referring to his written observations. Jeremiah followed, recounting the incident he had witnessed at the saloon. Then came 3 women former employees of Vernon's, each with similar stories of his volatile temper and threatening behavior. Miguel Sanchez, a ranch hand with a still visible scar across his cheek, described the beating he'd received after accusing Vernon of marking cards. "He said he would kill me if I told anyone," Miguel testified, "that no one would believe a Mexican over a businessman like him." Throughout the testimony, Vernon sat impassively, occasionally whispering to his lawyer. When it was his turn to speak, he approached the bench with the confident air of a man accustomed to deference. "Your Honor, I can't express the pain this situation has caused me," he began, his voice modulated to convey sincere distress. "My wife and I had a wonderful wedding day. That night, she became hysterical when it came time to fulfill her marital obligations." He glanced at Rose with practiced concern. "I've since learned that she has a history of nervous disorders. Her poor father struggled with her fits before his passing." Rose felt fury rise within her at the blatant lie, but Tuck's hand on her arm kept her seated. "She ran from our home in a state of confusion," Vernon continued. "I've been searching desperately ever since, worried for her safety." His voice hardened slightly. "Instead of being returned to my care, she was taken in by this man." He pointed at Tuck. "A recluse with a questionable past who has filled her head with false memories of abuse." "That's a lie." Rose couldn't contain herself any longer. "Mrs. Keegan," Judge Parker warned, "you'll have an opportunity to respond." Vernon's lawyer took over, painting Rose as unstable and Tuck as an opportunist with designs on a wealthy man's wife. The witnesses against Vernon were dismissed as disgruntled former employees or men with grudges. "What proof is there of these alleged injuries?" the lawyer demanded. "Only the word of a country doctor with personal ties to Blackburn. Mrs. Keegan appears perfectly healthy now." "If I may, Your Honor," Doc Wilson interrupted, standing, "I brought something that might address that point." He approached the bench with a small package, which he unwrapped to reveal Rose's wedding dress, still stiff with dried blood. "This was the garment Mrs. Keegan was wearing when found. I preserved it as evidence." A murmur ran through the courtroom as the judge examined the dress. Vernon's face darkened, his mask of concern slipping for a crucial moment. "That's not my wife's dress," he insisted, too loudly. "She wasn't wearing that on our wedding night." Rose's cousin Martha, seated in the gallery, gasped audibly. "But it is," she called out, standing despite attempts by those around her to quiet her. I helped her into it myself. There's a small tear on the left sleeve where it caught on a nail. I mended it the morning of the wedding. Judge Parker examined the sleeve, finding the mended tear exactly as described. Vernon's lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Mr. Keegan, Parker said, his voice glacial, do you care to explain how you recognize this is not your wife's dress, when you also claim you last saw her wearing it as she fled in confusion? Vernon's composure cracked visibly. She's lying, he snarled, all pretense abandoned. They're all lying, Mr. Keegan, the judge warned. Control yourself, but Vernon was beyond warnings. She's my wife, he said, advancing toward Rose. My property, no court can change that. Sheriff Doyle moved to intercept him, but Vernon shoved him aside with surprising strength. As he lunged toward Rose, Tuck stepped between them, catching Vernon's wrist in mid-strike. That's enough, Tuck said, his voice low but carrying in the stunned silence of the courtroom. Vernon struggled against Tuck's grip. You stole her from me, he hissed. She belongs to me. No woman belongs to any man, Tuck replied, tightening his hold until Vernon winced. Especially not one who treats her like you did. The bailiff and Sheriff Doyle managed to separate the men, restraining Vernon, who continued to shout threats and obscenities until Judge Parker ordered him removed from the courtroom. In the chaos that followed, Rose found herself seated again, trembling with the aftermath of confrontation. Tuck sat beside her, his own hand not entirely steady as he took hers. Are you all right? He asked quietly. Rose nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. Vernon's mask had fallen completely, revealing to everyone the monster she had seen on her wedding night. Whether it would be enough to sway the judge remained to be seen, but in that moment, the vindication of being believed was almost overwhelming. When order was restored, Judge Parker addressed the court. I've heard enough, he said, his voice stern. This court finds clear evidence of extreme cruelty that would endanger Mrs. Keegan's life should she be required to return to her husband. He looked directly at Rose. The petition for annulment is granted. This marriage is dissolved as if it never existed. The words washed over Rose like a cleansing wave. Free, she was free. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am issuing a warrant for Vernon Keegan's arrest on charges of attempted murder and perjury before this court. Sheriff Doyle, I trust you will execute this warrant without delay, regardless of your prior association with Mr. Keegan. Doyle, looking chastened, nodded his agreement. As the court adjourned, Rose found herself surrounded by well-wishers, the women who had testified, Doc Wilson and his son, Jeremiah, and even her cousin Martha, tearfully begging forgiveness for her part in encouraging the disastrous marriage. Through it all, Tuck remained at her side, a steady presence in the swirl of emotions and congratulations. It wasn't until they returned to the hotel that they found themselves alone, standing awkwardly in the corridor between their rooms. It's over, Rose said, the reality still sinking in. I'm free. You are, Tuck agreed, his smile reaching his eyes, free to do whatever you choose. The question hung unspoken between them. What would she choose? I should return to Colfax, Rose said slowly. The school term begins in 2 weeks. If they'll still have me as teacher after all this. They'd be fools not to, Tuck said. You're the bravest, most determined teacher those children could hope for. Rose studied his face, trying to read what lay beneath his supportive words. What will you do? Return to your cabin? Tuck nodded, though something like hesitation crossed his features. It's home. The cattle need tending. Of course, Rose said, disappointment settling in her chest despite her best efforts. What had she expected? That Tuck would declare himself, ask her to stay with him. Their connection, intense though it was, had formed under extraordinary circumstances. Perhaps in the return to normal life it would fade like a dream upon waking. Rose, Tuck said, interrupting her thoughts. I'm not good with words, never have been, but these past weeks. He paused, searching for the right expression. I don't want to say goodbye, not yet, maybe not ever, hope flared within her. What are you saying, Tuck? He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm saying that my cabin is 20 miles from Colfax. That's an easy ride on a good horse. I'm saying that I'd like to see you again properly, court you if you'd allow it. Court me, Rose repeated, a smile spreading across her face. That sounds very formal. Well, I aim to do things right. Tuck's own smile matched hers. A lady like you deserves proper courting. Flowers, Sunday dinners, walks in the town square where everyone can see we have honorable intentions. The contrast between this proposal and Vernon's flashy courtship couldn't have been starker. Where Vernon had sought to impress and possess, Tuck offered respect and choice. I'd like that, Rose said softly. Very much. Tuck's relief was palpable. Good, that's good. They stood there smiling at each other like fools until Rose, emboldened by newfound freedom and the warmth in Tuck's eyes, did something entirely improper. She rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was brief, chaste by most standards, but it sent a current of feeling through Rose unlike anything she'd experienced. Tuck's surprise gave way to gentle response, his hand coming up to cradle her cheek with exquisite care. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Tuck rested his forehead against hers. Not very proper courting, Mrs. Kincaid, he murmured, though his smile belied any real criticism. I think we're well past concerns of propriety, Mr. Blackburn, Rose replied. You've seen me in trousers, after all. His laugh was a wonderful sound, unguarded and genuine. Fair point. As they reluctantly bid each other good night, Rose felt a lightness that had nothing to do with her legal victory. The future, so recently clouded by fear and uncertainty, now stretched before her bright with possibility. She was Rose Kincaid again, teacher, survivor, and perhaps if the warmth in Tucker Blackburn's blue eyes was any indication, beloved. True to his word, Tuck courted Rose with proper attention to the social niceties of Colfax. Each Sunday after church, he would appear at the boarding house where she had taken a room, hat in hand, to escort her on a walk or to a picnic by the river. On Wednesday evenings, he would ride into town for dinner, bringing small gifts, wildflowers, a book of poetry he'd found in Auburn, once even a kitten from a litter born in his barn. The town buzzed with gossip at first. Rose Kincaid, whose disastrous marriage and dramatic annulment had provided weeks of conversation, was now being courted by the reclusive rancher who had saved her life. Some whispered that they had been lovers all along, that the annulment was a scheme to cover their affair. But as the months passed, even the most determined gossips found little to criticize in the couple's decorous behavior. Vernon Keegan's arrest and subsequent trial for attempted murder provided a fresh scandal to occupy the town's attention. Rose testified, her calm recounting of that terrible night lending credibility to the prosecution's case. When the jury returned a guilty verdict, sentencing Vernon to 15 years in the state prison, Rose felt the last shadows of fear lift from her heart. The school board, after some initial hesitation, had allowed Rose to resume her teaching position. The children, blessedly unconcerned with adult scandals, welcomed her back enthusiastically. She threw herself into her work, finding joy in their progress and satisfaction in building the school into an institution the town could be proud of. Through it all, Tuck was her constant support. He expanded his cattle operation, taking on 2 hired hands so he could spend more time in town. He built an addition to his cabin, a proper bedroom with a real bed, a larger kitchen with shelves for Rose's books, a covered porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset over the mountains. 6 months after the annulment, on a crisp autumn evening, Tuck proposed. They were sitting on that porch, wrapped in blankets against the evening chill, when he produced a small wooden box. I'm not one for grand gestures, he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. But I love you, Rose Kincaid, have since before I even knew what was happening to me. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? The ring inside the box was simple, a gold band set with a single pearl, but to Rose, it was perfect. Yes, she said, tears of happiness spilling onto her cheeks. Yes, Tucker Blackburn, I will marry you. They wed in the spring of 1876, exactly 1 year after Rose had first arrived in Colfax. The ceremony was small but joyful, held in the meadow beside Tuck's cabin where wildflowers created a natural cathedral. Doc Wilson gave the bride away, Jeremiah stood as best man, and Rose's students formed an impromptu choir, their young voices rising in celebration. Rose wore a dress of pale blue, deliberately choosing a color as far from white as propriety would allow. As she spoke her vows, looking into Tuck's steady blue eyes, she felt no fear, no doubt, only certainty that this man, who had found her broken and helped her heal, would cherish her all the days of their life together. That night, as Tuck carried her over the threshold of their cabin, now truly their home, Rose marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the bloody nightmare of her first marriage to the quiet joy of this second beginning, she had traversed a landscape of pain and healing, fear and courage. In Tuck's gentle arms, she found not possession but partnership, not dominance but devotion. Their coming together was an affirmation of everything they had survived, and everything they hoped to build, tender, passionate, and deeply reverent of the trust between them. Later, lying in the quiet darkness with Tuck's heartbeat steady beneath her cheek, Rose reflected on the strange twists of fate that had led her here. Had she not fled into those woods on that terrible night, had Tuck not been tracking the mountain lion that precise morning, their paths might never have crossed. "What are you thinking about, wife?" Tuck asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "How unlikely it all is," Rose replied. "That we found each other, that we're here now." Tuck was silent for a moment. "I don't believe it was chance," he said finally. "Not entirely. Something was guiding us toward each other." The sentiment, unexpectedly poetic from her practical husband, brought fresh tears to Rose's eyes. "I think you're right," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his chest, "and I'm eternally grateful for it." Life settled into a rhythm for the Blackburns. Rose continued teaching, riding to town on Monday mornings and returning to the cabin on Friday evenings, while Tuck expanded his ranch, eventually becoming one of the most successful cattle operations in the county. They balanced their separate work with their shared life, finding in each other the perfect complement to their individual strengths. 2 years after their wedding, Rose gave birth to their first child, a son they named James, after Tuck's father. The boy had his mother's green eyes and his father's serious expression, a combination that charmed everyone who met him. Rose took a year away from teaching, but returned when James was old enough to join her in the classroom, sleeping in a basket beside her desk while she taught. As Colfax grew, so did the Blackburn family. Sarah arrived 3 years after James, named for Tuck's lost sister, a solemn child with a gift for music. 2 years later came William, a robust boy who seemed determined to run before he could walk. Through the joys and challenges of parenthood, Rose and Tuck maintained the deep connection that had begun in those desperate days after her escape. They faced hardships, drought years that threatened the ranch, a scarlet fever outbreak that nearly claimed William, the inevitable conflicts that arise between two strong-willed individuals building a life together. But they faced them as partners, their bond strengthening with each challenge overcome. On their 10th anniversary, Tuck surprised Rose with a trip to San Francisco, her first return to the city since her father's death. They stayed in a grand hotel, attended the opera, and walked arm in arm through streets Rose barely recognized. So much had the city changed. On their final evening, standing on a hillside overlooking the bay as the sun set in spectacular fashion, Tuck pulled her close. "Are you happy, Rose?" he asked, a question he still posed occasionally, as if needing reassurance that she had no regrets. Rose turned in his arms, studying the face she knew better than her own, the lines at the corners of his eyes deeper now, strands of silver appearing in his wheat-colored hair, but those blue eyes still clear and steady as the day he'd found her in the woods. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she said truthfully. "You've given me everything I could want: love, family, purpose." She touched his cheek, feeling the familiar scratch of his beard. "Most of all, you've given me choice. The freedom to be myself, to grow alongside you rather than in your shadow." Tuck caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You gave me the same gift," he said. "Before you, I was half alive. You brought me back to the world." As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Rose thought of the frightened young woman who had crawled bleeding through the underbrush, certain her life was ending. How could she have known it was just beginning? In the years that followed, the Blackburn Ranch prospered, as did the family. James went east to college, returning with a law degree and a pretty wife from Boston. Sarah became the town's music teacher, her gentle spirit and talent touching generations of children. William, to no one's surprise, took to ranching with his father's quiet dedication. Rose eventually became headmistress of the school she had helped build, overseeing its growth into an academy that drew students from throughout the county. Her reputation as an educator spread, earning invitations to speak at teachers' colleges across the state. Through it all, the core of her life remained the partnership she had formed with the quiet cowboy who had found her at her lowest moment and helped her rise. Their love, born in crisis and nurtured through decades of shared life, became legendary in Colfax, a testament to second chances and the healing power of true devotion. In 1915, 40 years after he had tracked a bleeding bride through the wilderness, Tucker Blackburn passed peacefully in his sleep, his hand still holding roses as it had every night of their marriage. He was mourned throughout the county as a man of integrity and quiet strength, but by none more deeply than the woman he had saved and then cherished for 4 decades. Rose lived another 8 years, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. On her deathbed, with family gathered close, she asked for a moment alone with James, their firstborn. "Your father found me when I was lost in every way a person can be," she told him, her voice weak but her green eyes still bright. "He taught me that love isn't possession or control, but freedom and respect." She pressed a small wooden box into his hand, the same box in which Tuck had presented her engagement ring so many years before. "Remember that. Tell your children and their children. It's the most valuable lesson I know." When she slipped away later that evening, those who were present swore that, in her final moments, Rose smiled as if seeing someone beloved approaching from a great distance. She was laid to rest beside Tuck on the hillside near their cabin, which had grown over the years into a sprawling ranch house. The simple headstone bore only their names, the dates of their lives, and a single line chosen by Rose herself: "He found me bleeding and taught me to live again." The story of Rose and Tucker Blackburn passed into local legend, embellished in some tellings, simplified in others, but always centering on the rescue that became a redemption for them both. In Colfax, old-timers would point out the schoolhouse where Rose had taught, the site where the Golden Nugget Saloon had stood before burning down in 1890, the trail leading to the Blackburn Ranch where, they said, on certain moonlit nights, you might glimpse 2 riders moving in perfect harmony, finally and forever free.